about sole ownership versus concurrent ownership. Tenancy in common is co-ownership with no rights or survivorship among the co-owners. With tenancy in common, each co-owner holds an undivided fractional interest in the property. The ownership is divided, not the property. It is an undivided fractional interest in the property. The co-owners, each of which is a tenant in common, enjoy unity of possession, which is both of their rights or all of the owner's rights to occupy the entire property. Each co-owner's interest in a tenancy in common can be sold, conveyed, mortgaged, or transferred independent of the other owners. With a tenancy in common, because there is no right of survivorship among the co-owners, each co-owner's interest passes to their heirs or devisees when the co-owner dies. Tenancy in common allows for unequal shares of ownership, but must be specifically stated in the deed. The shares of ownership must be specifically stated in the deed. With a tenancy in common, all co-owners are responsible for the taxes and special assessments. Tenancy in common is the default type of ownership if no other form of ownership is stated on the deed. The law presumes that the owners are tenants in common. Joint tenancy is another form of concurrent ownership. Now, joint tenancy, unlike tenancy in common, is co-ownership with the rights of survivorship among the co-ownership. When you think of joint tenancy, think of PITT, which is the four unities of title. The P would mean unity of possession, which means all joint tenants or co-owners have an undivided right to possess the entire property. Unity of interest, that's the I in the PITT. All joint tenants have equal interests in the property. The first T in PITT, unity of time. All joint tenants acquire their interest at the same time. And the second T is unity of title. Title is conveyed to all tenants by the same document. PITT, possession, interest, time, and title. Those are the four unities of joint tenancy. With joint tenancy, the co-owners enjoy the right of survivorship. That means the interest of any deceased co-owner passes to the other co-owners upon death, and they don't have to go through probate. It just happens automatically. Right of survivorship is inherent in a joint tenancy deed. Right of survivorship on a joint tenancy deed will override or supersede a will. A joint tenancy is terminated upon the death of all but one co-owner, who then becomes the sole owner of the property and has an estate in severalty. Joint tenancies can also be terminated as a result of a partition suit, which is a court action forcing the division or sale of a property. Let's talk now about common interest ownership properties, such as condominiums and townhomes. All condominiums and townhomes comprise four basic components. The units are owned by individual owners holding a fee simple title to the interior of the unit. The common elements include the remainder of the buildings and land, such as the hallways and elevators. All common elements are owned by all current unit owners as tenants in common with one another. The limited common elements are common elements reserved for the exclusive use by one or more unit owners to the exclusion of all the other unit owners, such as balconies, storage units, or assigned parking spaces. An association that governs the condominium may charge fees, also known as monthly dues, on each unit owner to pay for the maintenance of the common elements and assessments to pay for extraordinary expenses. The association may hire outside property management firm to administer the property, and the association may have first right of refusal when a unit owner decides to sell. The Uniform Condominium Act, or UCA, defines how condominiums are created and owned. It has been adopted by many states. However, each state creates its own condominium laws. That's the Uniform Condominium Act defines how condominiums are created and owned. But the states always create their own condominium laws. Timeshares. Timeshares are a form of common interest ownership in which multiple owners have a possessory interest in the same property for a certain time period each year. Timeshares are most commonly used for resort-type properties or recreational-type properties. In a cooperative, a corporation owns the land and the building, and it leases space to a shareholder who owns stock in the corporation. The corporation sells shares of stock to prospective tenants. The purchaser of stock becomes a shareholder in the corporation and receives a proprietary lease. So when you think of cooperative, think of corporation. Cooperative, corporation. And that's easy to remember because cooperative starts with CO and corporation starts with CO. Those two words go together. Because there is no ownership of the space, the buyers or the tenants do not receive a deed. The stock they own in the corporation is personal property, not real property. The tenant or buyer does not own any real estate. They receive a proprietary lease. Shareholders in a co-op elect officers and directors who are responsible for operating the cooperative according to the bylaws. Funds for the budget are assessed to the individual shareholders, generally in the form of monthly fees or dues. A lender may accept stock as collateral for financing. The cooperative may have a right of first refusal when a unit owner wants to sell. The IRS treats cooperatives the same as houses and condominiums with respect to deductibility of loan interest, property taxes, and other tax exclusions. Now let's talk about ownership in severalty or sole ownership. When a single party holds title to real estate, that ownership is known as ownership in severalty. In other words, they are severed from the rest of the world in their ownership. Ownership in severalty involves sole rights to ownership and sole discretion to transfer rights. Partnerships can also take title in severalty. As an entity, the partnership is one entity owning the property in severalty. We can have a general partnership where all partners share equal profits and liability, or we can have a limited partnership. Limited partners are responsible only for the amount they invested in the partnership. So their liability equals the amount invested.